Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the History Cloak channel. I'm Mr. McGee. We have had the holidays, Christmas, New Year's, there's been a break, school has started back, and now that everything has started to settle down, we are back to new episodes. And of course, we are continuing our series on the history of Israel. Now, in the last episode, we talked about the First Arab-Israeli War and the aftermath of that war. We saw the map now that Israel is a country and had defeated the 5 Arab countries that had invaded it. We also talked about the refugee situation after the war, as well as the Jews in other parts of the Arab world being kicked out of their countries and coming to Israel. And so now what we're going to do in today's episode is we're going to take a look at a series of 3 wars. We have the Suez Canal Crisis, we have the Six-Day War, and we have the Yom Kippur War. I'm going to go through a brief overview of all 3 of those wars, again, to help us understand what has happened in that area of the world, and also to help us understand Israel and what is going on in Israel and Gaza today. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's begin. Now, we're going to jump from the end of the First Arab-Israeli War in 1949, and we are going to jump 6 years to 1955. Egypt is now a republic of sorts, led by a man named Gamal Abdel Nasser. He is now the first president of Egypt. He has not forgotten that Israel defeated Egypt as well as the other countries that invaded, and he is looking for a way to defeat Israel. If he can defeat Israel, he basically is the leader of all of the Middle East and North Africa, if he can do that. Now, he is going to come up with a new tactic for trying to defeat Israel. That is, he is going to fund terrorists in the Gaza Strip to attack Israeli settlements. The name of that terrorist group is the Fedayeen. To quote Nasser in reference to the Fedayeen, Egypt has decided to dispatch her heroes, the disciples of Pharaoh and the sons of Islam, and they will cleanse the land of Palestine. There will be no peace on Israel's border because we demand vengeance, and vengeance is Israel's death. So that kind of tells you where Nasser's coming from. Nasser not only wants to destroy Israel, he also wants to be a player on the world stage. So he has nationalized the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal, as you see, is very important because it links the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, meaning you don't have to sail all the way around Africa if you're in Europe if you want to get to Asia. It is a very important trade route. Well, that trade route was owned by Britain and France. Well, now that Nasser is in power, he has kicked out Britain and France and nationalized the Suez Canal. Nationalization in this case means to take something that would have belonged to another country that is located in your country, and you are saying, hey, you know what, since it's in our country, we are taking over this thing and we're running it ourselves. So that is nationalizing the Suez Canal. So Nasser has done that thing, and it's going to be important for us. We're not going to get into the history of the Suez Canal and how it was built, but it is important for us to know that in 1956, Nasser has nationalized the Suez Canal. Along with nationalizing the Suez Canal, Nasser also blocked the Straits of Tiran as well as the Gulf of Aqaba from Israeli shipping. In other words, anybody else could use the Straits of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba, but Israel could not. Now, by the way, that is a problem because you are blockading Israel from getting important things like petroleum, as well as any sorts of food supplies or weapons that it needs. Now, with all of these things happening, the blockades, the nationalization, as well as the funding of terrorists, the tension is ratcheting up between Israel and Egypt. To quote Nasser regarding these tensions building, I am not solely fighting against Israel itself. My task is to deliver the Arab world from destruction through Israel's intrigue, which has its roots abroad. In other words, he's saying that Israel is planning harm to the Middle East, and they're being backed by Western powers like the United States, for instance. Now, to continue our quote, our hatred is very strong. There is no sense in talking about peace with Israel. There is not even the smallest place for negotiations. Now remember, all of this is happening around the summer of 1956. All this background is really important to understanding the Suez Canal crisis. Now, do you remember I told you that Britain and France used to own the Suez Canal? Well, they are not happy about losing it. They want it back. They are also looking at Israel and thinking, hey, Israel would love to weaken Egypt because Egypt is funding the Fedayeen, Egypt is blocking supplies from getting to Israel, so Israel would have no problem with doing something that would weaken Israel. With this in mind, Egypt and France make a deal with Israel. Israel, you attack Egypt, and then we will come in to stop the fighting. And by the way, since we're there stopping the fighting, we might as well also take the Suez Canal back as well. Their goal is really to take the Suez Canal back. Israel agrees to this because, hey, if Britain and France own the Suez Canal, that weakens Egypt, which means that Egypt is not in a position to threaten the existence of Israel. So on October 29th, 1956, Israel attacks Egypt and pretty much completely defeats them and takes over the Sinai Peninsula. Now, while Israel's defeating Egypt in the Sinai Peninsula, Britain and France send paratroopers to land near the Suez Canal and advance to the Suez Canal to take it over. There is only one problem with this plan. Nobody told the United States or the Soviet Union that this was going to happen. Now, to say that President Dwight Eisenhower was ticked off would be an understatement. He is furious. The Soviet Union doesn't like this either, by the way. Now, both of them, again, hard to believe that both the United States and the Soviet Union could actually work together on something, but both of them decide, no, this is not going to happen. The Soviet Union threatens Britain with all sorts of weapons that they will unleash on Britain if they do not stop. The United States says, hey, we were going to loan $1 billion to the International Monetary Fund, but you know what? I don't think we are unless Britain, you stop. And so Britain, advancing to the Suez Canal, goes, oh, all right, ceasefire, we're done. Because all of a sudden the international community is looking at Britain and France and they realize exactly what they're doing. And so Britain announces a ceasefire. France will also accept a ceasefire as well. Israel will be forced to pull out from the Sinai Peninsula, making no gains at all. And basically is a whole huge crisis that ends with Egypt retaining the Suez Canal, Britain and France having to go home with their tail between their legs, and the Israeli citizens mad at their own government for pulling out because they feel that by pulling out of the Sinai Peninsula, they basically handed Egypt power again to continue to attack their settlements. The point from the United States perspective under Eisenhower was that, A, if something like this is going to happen, the United States needs to know about it. Number two, this is not going to happen because the last thing we want is some sort of World War III happening. So, everybody basically has to go back to their corners. Nasser actually emerges as a hero with the people of Egypt because even though he lost in the Sinai Peninsula to Israel, because Israel had to leave the Sinai Peninsula and Egypt and France had to go back home, he emerges as the hero who has defeated the Western powers and the hated Jewish country. So now his power has actually increased as a result of the Suez Canal crisis. Now, one positive for Israel, or a slight positive we should say, is that the Fedayeen's activities in Israel basically ended after the Suez Canal crisis. Now, the bad news is that a few years later, those same terrorists came back together to form a loose-knit group called the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization. And if you know anything about the PLO, they are going to be a terrorist group that plays a huge part in Israel in the 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, and so on. Even though we'll talk about the PLO in later episodes, it is important that we at least mention the fact that the PLO became officially an organization in 1964. Not only that, but Yasser Arafat, a guy that we'll mention in future episodes, he will be the leader of the PLO, and he's the leader of the largest faction of the PLO, Fatah. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly, which means victory. They will begin launching terrorist attacks into Israel. Again, we'll talk about them in later episodes, but we need to know these facts now. Surprise! Sorry for having to cut the video short like that. I thought I would have enough time to be able to cover the Suez Canal, the 6-Day War, and the Yom Kippur War all in one episode. Turns out, no, it's taking way too much time. The Suez Canal episode alone took about 10 minutes, so I don't think you want a 30-minute video. So I'm going to cut it short here and break up the Suez Canal, 6-Day War, and Yom Kippur War into 2, possibly 3 episodes. I figure it'll be a lot better in bite-sized chunks. So, sorry for the hard cut, but just want to let you know that's why it's to be continued. So, as per the usual, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them politely and respectfully in the description box below. I'm Mr. McGee. Take care.